My daughter-in-law told the waiter, "Just tap water for her," like I was some burden she had to carry. Those words cut through me like ice on bare skin. I sat there in that expensive Manhattan restaurant, feeling smaller than I had ever felt in my 68 years of life. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. The restaurant was one of those places where the marble tables cost more than most people's cars. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen teardrops, casting shadows that danced across the white tablecloths. The smell of truffle oil and aged wine filled the air, mixed with the distant hum of Manhattan traffic filtering through the tall windows. This was supposed to be a celebration. My son David's promotion at his law firm. A family dinner where we would all smile and pretend we were happy. But I wasn't happy. I was exhausted. I had been exhausted for years, carrying the weight of this family on my shoulders while they treated me like I was invisible. My black dress, the nicest one I owned, suddenly felt shabby next to my daughter-in-law Miranda's designer outfit. Her red silk dress probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. Her jewelry caught the light every time she moved her perfectly manicured hands. And there I sat, clutching my old leather purse, waiting for the waiter to bring me tap water while everyone else ordered wine that cost $50 a glass. The waiter looked at me with something that might have been pity. He was young, probably in his 20s, with kind eyes that reminded me of my grandson Tommy. When he poured the water into my glass, I saw his hands shake slightly. Even he could feel the tension at our table. "Are you ready to order, ma'am?" he asked David, completely ignoring me. That's when it hit me. The realization that I had been living this way for years. Being treated like a ghost in my own family. Being spoken for instead of spoken to. Being dismissed and forgotten and pushed aside like furniture that had outlived its usefulness. I thought about the photo album sitting in my bedroom back in Queens. Pictures of David as a baby, toddling around our old apartment in Brooklyn. Pictures of him graduating from college, me beaming with pride in the front row. Pictures of his wedding day, where Miranda barely looked at me during the entire ceremony. The smell of my late husband Robert's cologne still lingered on his old jacket hanging in my closet. Sometimes I would press my face into the fabric just to remember what it felt like to be loved unconditionally. Robert would have never let anyone treat me this way. He would have stood up and walked out of that restaurant, taking me with him. But Robert had been gone for 3 years now. And I was alone. "Mom looks tired," Miranda whispered to David, loud enough for me to hear. "Maybe she should go home early tonight." Go home early? Like I was a child who needed a bedtime. I stared down at my reflection in the water glass and wondered when I had become this person. When had I started accepting crumbs when I deserved the whole meal? The waiter came back, hovering near our table with his notepad ready. Miranda ordered the lobster. David ordered the prime rib. They both looked at me expectantly, waiting for me to order something cheap and small, something that wouldn't embarrass them or cost too much. But something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the way Miranda had dismissed me to the waiter like I was a piece of furniture. Maybe it was the years of being taken for granted, of being used and discarded whenever it was convenient. Maybe it was the memory of Robert telling me, just before he died, that I was the strongest person he had ever known. "I'll have the Wagyu beef," I said quietly. "The premium selection." The waiter's eyebrows shot up. David choked on his wine. Miranda's fork froze halfway to her mouth. "Mom," David said, his voice tight with embarrassment. That's very expensive." "I know exactly how much it costs," I replied, looking him straight in the eye. $1,200. The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Other diners at nearby tables started glancing over at us. Miranda's face turned red, then white, then red again. David looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Are you serious?" Miranda stammered. I smiled at her. The first genuine smile I had given her in months. Dead serious. You see, what they didn't know was that I had been planning this moment for weeks. Ever since I discovered something that changed everything. Ever since I found out the truth about what my family really thought of me. But let me back up. Let me tell you how I got to this point. How a woman who raised her son to be a successful lawyer, who sacrificed everything for her family, ended up sitting in a Manhattan restaurant ordering the most expensive item on the menu just to prove a point. It started 35 years ago when David was born. Robert and I lived in a tiny one-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn back then. We didn't have much money, but we had love. We had dreams. We had each other. When David took his first steps, I was there. When he said his first word, I was there. When he got sick with pneumonia at age 3 and spent 2 weeks in the hospital, I never left his side. Robert worked double shifts to pay the medical bills, and I held our son's hand every night until he fell asleep. I was there for every baseball game, every parent-teacher conference, every scraped knee and broken heart. When David wanted to quit the debate team in high school, I talked him out of it. When he almost didn't apply to law school because he was afraid of the debt, I convinced him to follow his dreams. You're going to be somebody special, I told him. And your father and I will do whatever it takes to help you get there. We remortgaged our house to pay for his education. We ate peanut butter sandwiches for dinner so he could have spending money at college. When he graduated and moved to Manhattan, we gave him every penny we had saved for our retirement to help him get started. Just until I get on my feet, Mom, he promised. I'll pay you back as soon as I can. That was 10 years ago. The payback never came. Instead, came Miranda. Miranda was everything I wasn't. Young, beautiful, polished. She had grown up on the Upper East Side with parents who owned art galleries and summer homes in the Hamptons. She spoke 3 languages and had never worked a day in her life before meeting David. At first, I tried to like her. I really did. I bought her expensive birthday gifts I couldn't afford. I babysat their children whenever they asked. I cooked their favorite meals and cleaned their apartment when Miranda complained about not having enough time. But nothing I did was ever good enough. Your mother means well, I heard Miranda tell David once when they thought I couldn't hear them. But she's so common. The way she dresses, the way she talks. It's embarrassing. Common. That word hit me like a physical blow. I thought about all the nights I had stayed up sewing David's Halloween costumes by hand because we couldn't afford to buy them. I thought about all the times I had walked to work in the rain to save bus fare so we could afford his school supplies. I thought about all the sacrifices I had made, all the love I had given, and how it all amounted to being common in the eyes of my daughter-in-law. But I swallowed the hurt. I told myself that love meant sacrifice. That family came first, no matter what. When David and Miranda had their first child, Tommy, I was over the moon. Finally, I thought, I would have someone who loved me unconditionally again. Someone who needed me. And for a while, it was wonderful. Tommy was a beautiful baby with David's dark eyes and my husband's gentle smile. I would spend hours rocking him to sleep, singing the same lullabies I had sung to David when he was small. But as Tommy got older, I noticed how Miranda would tense up whenever I held him. How she would find excuses to take him away from me. How she would correct everything I said to him. It's not Grandma, she would snap. It's Grandmother. We're trying to teach him proper English. Proper English. As if the words I had used to raise my own son weren't good enough for my grandson. When their second child, Sarah, was born 2 years later, the pattern repeated itself. I was useful for babysitting and late-night feedings, but I wasn't allowed to form a real bond with my grandchildren. I was hired help, not family. The requests for money started small. A few $100s here and there for emergencies. David would call me, his voice heavy with stress. Mom, I hate to ask, but Miranda's car needs repair work and we're a little short this month. Could you help us out? How could I say no? This was my son, my only child. The little boy I had rocked to sleep and cheered for at Little League games and helped with homework every night for 12 years. So I dipped into my savings. Again and again. When David wanted to start his own law practice, I gave him $20,000. My entire retirement fund. This is it, Mom, he said, hugging me tight. This is going to change everything. I'll be able to pay you back with interest. But the law practice struggled. And the requests for money kept coming. The children's private school tuition. The down payment on their apartment. The family vacation to Europe that I wasn't invited on. It would be boring for you, Mom, David explained when I asked about the trip. All those museums and fancy restaurants. You wouldn't enjoy it. I wouldn't enjoy spending time with my family? I wouldn't enjoy seeing the world with my son and grandchildren? But I smiled and nodded and wrote another check to cover their expenses while they gallivanted around Paris without me. The loneliness was the hardest part. After Robert died, the apartment in Queens felt enormous and empty. I would sit in his old recliner, surrounded by 40 years of memories, and wonder how my life had become so small. David called once a week, usually when he needed something. Miranda never called at all. The grandchildren would wave at me politely when I saw them, but they were strangers to me. Polite, well-dressed strangers who called me grandmother in voices that sounded rehearsed. My old friends had either moved away or passed away. My sister lived in Florida now, busy with her own grandchildren who actually seemed to love her. I spent my days watching television and doing crossword puzzles and counting the hours until bedtime. Is this what my life had come to? Is this what all those years of sacrifice had earned me? The breaking point came last winter. I caught the flu and was bedridden for over a week. I called David, hoping he might bring me some soup or just check on me. Oh, Mom, he said, distracted. Miranda and I are swamped with work right now. Can't you call your doctor if you're really sick? Your doctor. As if my own son couldn't spare an hour to see if his mother was dying. I hung up the phone and cried harder than I had since Robert's funeral. Not because I was sick, but because I realized that my family didn't really care whether I lived or died. I was just an ATM to them. A convenient source of money and free babysitting who could be ignored the rest of the time. That's when I met Lena. Lena lived 2 doors down from me in our building. She was a Puerto Rican woman about my age who had lost her husband around the same time I lost Robert. I had seen her in the hallway a few times, always dressed impeccably despite her modest circumstances, always quick with a warm smile. One afternoon, when I was struggling to carry my groceries up 3 flights of stairs, she appeared at my side. "Here, let me help you with that, Mija," she said in accented English, taking half my bags without waiting for permission. We climbed the stairs together in comfortable silence. When we reached my door, she lingered for a moment. "You look tired," she said gently. "When's the last time you had a real conversation with another adult?" I couldn't remember. That evening, she knocked on my door with a pot of homemade soup and a bottle of wine. "I made too much," she said, though we both knew that wasn't true. "Would you like some company?" That night, for the first time in years, I talked to someone who actually listened. Someone who looked me in the eye and asked follow-up questions and seemed genuinely interested in my answers. Lena had been married for 42 years to a man named Miguel who had worked construction his whole life. They had raised 4 children on his modest salary, and unlike my experience, all 4 children called her regularly and visited often. "Family should lift you up," she told me as we shared our second bottle of wine. "They should make you feel loved and valued, not used and forgotten." "But they're all I have," I protested. "If I don't have my family, what do I have?" Lena studied my face for a long moment. "What do you have now?" she asked quietly. The question haunted me for weeks. What did I have? A son who treated me like an ATM? A daughter-in-law who was embarrassed by me? Grandchildren who barely knew me? An empty apartment full of memories and no future to look forward to? Maybe having nothing would be better than having this. Lena started inviting me to things. Senior center activities, community dinners, museum trips organized by the local church. At first, I resisted. These weren't my people. I had a family. I didn't need charity. But slowly, I started to realize that these strangers treated me with more kindness and respect than my own family did. They remembered my name. They asked about my week. They included me in conversations and laughed at my jokes. When was the last time my family had laughed at one of my jokes? It was around this time that I made the discovery that changed everything. I was at David and Miranda's apartment, babysitting Tommy and Sarah while they went to some work function. The children were asleep, and I was cleaning up their dinner dishes when I heard Miranda's phone buzzing on the kitchen counter. I wouldn't normally look at someone else's phone, but the name on the screen caught my eye. It was my name. Someone was texting Miranda about me. Curiosity got the better of me. I picked up the phone and read the messages. They were from David. And what I saw made my blood run cold. "Is your mother-in-law still coming to the restaurant thing tonight?" the text read. "Unfortunately, yes," Miranda had replied. "I tried to get David to uninvite her, but he says we need to keep her happy until Tommy and Sarah are older. You know how she gets when she feels left out. LOL, just seat her somewhere she can't embarrass you. Order her the cheapest thing on the menu. Already planning on it. Just tap water and maybe a side salad. She won't even notice. You're evil. I love it." There were more messages. Months' worth of conversations about me. About how pathetic I was. About how they were just managing me until they didn't need my money anymore. About how they made fun of my clothes, my apartment, the way I pronounced certain words. They called me the bank in some messages. In others, I was the babysitter. Never once did they call me mom. Or grandmother. Or even use my real name. I was just a resource to be managed and exploited. I set the phone down with trembling hands and walked to the bathroom, where I stared at my reflection in the mirror for a long time. The face looking back at me was older than I remembered. Tired. Defeated. But there was something else in my eyes now. Something I hadn't seen in years. Anger. Not the hot, explosive kind of anger that burns out quickly. The cold, steady kind of anger that builds over time and doesn't go away. The kind of anger that makes you dangerous. I finished cleaning up the dishes and sat quietly in their living room until they came home. When David offered to drive me back to Queens, I politely declined and took the subway instead. During that long ride home, I made a decision. I was done being their bank. I was done being their babysitter. I was done being treated like a burden and an embarrassment. But I wasn't going to scream or cry or make a scene. I was going to do something much more devastating. I was going to show them exactly what it felt like to be dismissed and disrespected. The plan formed slowly over the next few weeks. David called, as usual, asking for money. "Mom, we've got Tommy's school tuition due and things are a little tight," he said in that practiced tone that meant he'd had this conversation with Miranda before calling me. "How much do you need?" I asked. "Just 5,000. I know it's a lot, but I'll think about it," I interrupted. "Let me get back to you." I never called back. A few days later, Miranda called. This was unusual. She almost never spoke to me directly. "Hi, mother," she said in her fake, sweet voice. "David mentioned you might help with Tommy's tuition? The deadline is coming up soon." "I'm considering my options," I replied calmly. "I'll let you know." I could hear the frustration in her voice, barely contained. "Well, we really do need to know soon. We've been counting on, I'll let you know," I repeated, and hung up. For the first time in years, I was the one in control. The restaurant invitation came a week later. David's promotion celebration. A family dinner at some fancy place in Midtown. "It would mean so much to have you there, Mom," David said over the phone. "This promotion is a big deal for us." For us? Not for him. For them. "Of course I'll be there," I said sweetly. I wouldn't miss it. What I didn't tell him was that I had been planning for this moment. I had done my research on the restaurant. I knew exactly what the most expensive item on the menu was. And I knew exactly how much it would hurt their pride to watch me order it. But the real masterstroke was what I had done with my finances. Remember, I'm not stupid. I may be common, by Miranda's standards, but I raised a successful lawyer. I'm not some doddering old woman who doesn't understand money. Over the years, I had been careful with my investments. Robert had left me with a modest life insurance policy, and I had been living frugally for so long that my savings had actually grown despite all the money I'd given to David. I had enough money to order that $1,200 dinner 100 times over. But they didn't know that. They thought I was living on Social Security and the occasional pension check. They thought I was one step away from poverty. They thought I needed them more than they needed me. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The night of the dinner, I dressed carefully. Not in my usual conservative black dress, but in something I had bought specifically for this occasion. A deep blue cocktail dress that brought out my eyes. Real pearls that had been my mother's. Shoes that were comfortable enough to walk in but expensive enough to make a statement. When I walked into that restaurant, I felt powerful for the first time in years. David and Miranda were already seated at the table, checking their phones and barely looking up when I arrived. The waiter who showed me to my seat was polite but dismissive, clearly taking cues from my family about how I should be treated. That's when Miranda made her mistake. "Just tap water for her," she told the waiter, not even bothering to ask what I wanted to drink. In that moment, all of my anger crystallized into perfect clarity. I smiled at the waiter and said, "Actually, I'll start with a glass of your best champagne. The Dom Perignon, please." Miranda's mouth fell open. David started to object, but I held up my hand. "This is a celebration, isn't it?" I said cheerfully. "We should celebrate properly." The champagne arrived, along with menus that might as well have been printed in gold ink. Everything was outrageously expensive, but that was the point. When the waiter came to take our orders, I watched Miranda whisper her request for tap water, knowing she was trying to control what I would eat just like she tried to control everything else about me. But this time, I was ready. "I'll have the Wagyu beef," I announced. The premium selection. The silence that followed was beautiful. Absolute and complete silence while my family processed what I had just done. "Mom," David finally managed. That's $1,200. "I can read," I replied pleasantly. "I'll also have the truffle appetizer and the lobster bisque to start." Miranda looked like she was going to faint. "You can't be serious." "Why not?" I asked, taking a sip of my champagne. "This is supposed to be a celebration of David's success. Shouldn't we celebrate in style?" "But that's so expensive," David stammered. I set down my champagne flute and looked at him with the same expression I used to give him when he was a child and had disappointed me. "You make $300,000 a year," I said quietly. "Your wife doesn't work. You live in a $1 million apartment that I helped you buy. You send your children to private schools that cost more than most people's salaries. And you're worried about one dinner?" "It's not about the money," Miranda said quickly. "It's about being reasonable." "Reasonable," I repeated slowly. "Like how it was reasonable for you to take $20,000 of my retirement savings. Like how it was reasonable for you to let me babysit your children for free while you went to Europe without me. Like how it was reasonable to call me, the bank, in your text messages." The color drained from both of their faces. "Mom," David started, but I cut him off. "Oh yes, I know about the text messages. I know about all of it. I know how you really feel about me. How you've been managing me like a problem to be solved rather than treating me like family." The waiter returned with my appetizer, apparently oblivious to the tension at our table. The truffle dish was artfully arranged on bone china, probably worth more than I usually spent on groceries in a month. I took a bite and made a show of savoring it. "Delicious," I announced. "Worth every penny." Miranda and David sat there in stunned silence while I continued eating. Other diners were starting to stare now, probably wondering why this older woman was dining alone while two younger people sat at her table looking miserable. "What do you want?" Miranda finally asked through gritted teeth. I want to enjoy my dinner, I said simply. This is delicious champagne, by the way. You should try some. You know that's not what I meant. I set down my fork and looked at her directly. Really looked at her, maybe for the first time since I'd known her. She was beautiful, I'll give her that. The kind of polished, artificial beauty that money could buy. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, perfect clothes. But there was something cold in her eyes. Something calculating. What I want, I said slowly, is to be treated with respect. What I want is to be included in my family instead of being used by them. What I want is for my son to remember that I'm his mother, not his personal ATM. We've never treated you like an ATM, David protested. I reached into my purse and pulled out a sheet of paper I had prepared. It was a list of every loan, every payment, every gift I had given them over the past 10 years. The total was staggering, even to me. $87,000, I said, sliding the paper across the table. That's how much money you've taken from me. Not borrowed. Taken. Because not once, not even once, have you paid back a single penny. David stared at the list like it might bite him. Mom, you know we're grateful, are you? I interrupted. Because your text messages suggest otherwise. The main course arrived. My Wagyu beef was perfectly prepared, tender and flavorful and absolutely worth the price. I cut a small piece and chewed thoughtfully while my son and daughter-in-law watched me with a mixture of horror and fascination. This is really excellent, I commented. I can see why it costs so much. Are you trying to bankrupt us? Miranda snapped. Is that what this is about? Revenge? I laughed. Actually laughed out loud. Bankrupt you? With one dinner? Miranda, darling, if one dinner can bankrupt you, then you have much bigger problems than I thought. You know what I mean. No, I don't think I do. Explain it to me. She looked around nervously, realizing that other diners were now openly watching our table. You're making a scene. Am I? I'm just enjoying a nice dinner with my family. Isn't that what we're here for? The waiter appeared again, probably sensing tension but maintaining his professional demeanor. How is everything this evening? Wonderful, I replied warmly. Could I see the dessert menu? And perhaps your finest cognac selection? Certainly, madam. When he left, David leaned forward desperately. Mom, please. Let's talk about this at home. Why? So you can dismiss me again? So you can manage me like a problem to be solved? I took another sip of champagne and felt a warmth spreading through me that had nothing to do with the alcohol. It was the warmth of finally standing up for myself. I have a proposition for you, I continued calmly. From now on, you can treat me like family. Real family. You can include me in your plans, respect my opinions, and stop talking about me like I'm a burden. Or what? Miranda demanded. Or you can do without me entirely. No more babysitting. No more loans. No more gifts. No more grandmother at all. You wouldn't, David said, but his voice was uncertain. Try me. The dessert menu arrived, along with a selection of cognacs that cost more per glass than I usually spent on a week's worth of groceries. I ordered both the chocolate soufflé and the crème brûlée, along with a glass of cognac that was older than my grandchildren. While we're waiting, I said conversationally, let me tell you about Lena. She's my neighbor. A lovely woman who lost her husband around the same time I lost your father. I paused to let that sink in. Lena has 4 children. Do you know how often they call her? Every day. Do you know how often they visit? At least once a week. Do you know how they treat her when she comes to dinner? Like an honored guest. David shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Mom, I'm not finished. Lena's children don't have much money. One of them cleans office buildings. Another works in a grocery store. But they treat their mother like a queen. They ask her advice. They include her in family decisions. They introduce her to their friends with pride. The desserts arrived, arranged like small works of art on delicate plates. I took a bite of the soufflé and closed my eyes in appreciation. I've been thinking about what the difference is between Lena's family and mine. And I think I figured it out. What? Miranda asked tightly. Love, I said simply. Lena's children love her. Mine just use her. The words hung in the air like smoke. David looked like he'd been slapped. Miranda's face was flushed with anger and embarrassment. That's not fair, David said quietly. Isn't it? When's the last time you called me just to talk? When's the last time you asked about my day, my health, my feelings? When's the last time you included me in a family decision or asked my opinion about anything important? He didn't answer because he couldn't. When's the last time you said you loved me without asking for money in the same conversation? Still no answer. I finished both desserts slowly, savoring every bite while my family sat in uncomfortable silence. The cognac was smooth and warm, with hints of vanilla and oak. It was the most expensive alcohol I'd ever tasted, and it was worth every penny. When the check finally arrived, the waiter discreetly placed it next to David's plate. I could see him glance at the total and go pale. $2,473. For one meal. Don't worry, I said cheerfully, reaching for my purse. This one's on me. I pulled out my credit card and handed it to the waiter without even looking at the total. David and Miranda stared at me like I'd grown a second head. How? Miranda whispered. How what? How can you afford this? I smiled at her. Contrary to what you might think, I'm not poor. I've been careful with my money over the years. Robert left me well provided for, and I've made some good investments. I could afford to eat like this every night if I wanted to. But you always said, I said I was being careful with money. I never said I didn't have any. The truth was, I had been living modestly not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I had been saving money, investing wisely, preparing for my future. The money I'd given them over the years? It had hurt, but it hadn't bankrupted me. But they didn't need to know that until now. The waiter returned with my card and a warm smile. Thank you very much, madam. I hope you enjoyed your evening. I did, I replied honestly. I really did. As we left the restaurant, I felt lighter than I had in years. David and Miranda followed behind me in silence, probably still processing what had just happened. On the sidewalk outside, David finally found his voice. Mom, we need to talk about this. Yes, I agreed. We do. But not tonight. Tonight, I'm going home to my apartment in Queens, where I'm going to sit in your father's old chair and think about what I want my future to look like. What's that supposed to mean? I looked at my son, this man I had raised and loved and sacrificed everything for, and I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. It means I'm done, David. I'm done being your safety net. I'm done being your backup plan. I'm done being treated like hired help instead of family. You're our family, he protested. Of course you are. No, I said quietly. Family doesn't treat each other the way you've been treating me. Family doesn't call each other, the bank, behind their backs. Miranda finally spoke up. We can explain, no explanation needed. I heard exactly what you really think of me. I turned and walked toward the subway station, leaving them standing on the sidewalk. Behind me, I heard David call my name, but I didn't turn around. For the first time in years, I was walking away from them instead of running toward them. The subway ride back to Queens gave me time to think. What had I just done? Had I just destroyed my relationship with my only child and my grandchildren over pride? No. I had finally stood up for myself after years of being taken for granted. When I got home, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in Robert's old chair, still wearing my expensive dress and pearls. The apartment felt different somehow. Not empty, but peaceful. My phone started ringing within an hour. David, then Miranda, then David again. I let them all go to voicemail. The next morning, I listened to the messages. David, Mom, we need to talk. Please call me back. Miranda, Mother, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Please call us. David again, Mom, the kids are asking where Grandma is. Please don't punish them for our mistakes. That last one almost got to me. Almost. But then I remembered all the times they had used the children as leverage. All the times they had threatened to keep me from seeing Tommy and Sarah unless I did what they wanted. I deleted all the messages and went to have breakfast with Lena. You look different, she said when she opened her door. Lighter somehow. I told her about the dinner, about the $1,200 beef, about walking away from my son and daughter-in-law on a Manhattan sidewalk. She listened without judgment, nodding occasionally and refilling my coffee cup when it got empty. What now? She asked when I finished. I don't know, I admitted. For the first time in years, I don't know what happens next. That's not necessarily a bad thing, she said gently. Sometimes not knowing means you have choices for the first time. Over the next few weeks, the calls and messages continued. David even showed up at my apartment once, but I didn't answer the door. I could hear him in the hallway, pleading with me to let him in, but I sat quietly in the kitchen until he gave up and left. Miranda tried a different approach. She sent me flowers with a note that said, "We miss you." The children miss their grandmother. I gave the flowers to Lena and threw away the note. Then came the email from David's lawyer. Not from David himself, from his lawyer. Threatening to sue me for elder abuse and financial manipulation. That's when I knew I had them rattled. When someone threatens to sue their own mother for ordering an expensive dinner, you know they're desperate. I forwarded the email to my own lawyer, a sharp woman in her 50s who specialized in elder law. She called me an hour later, laughing. They want to sue you for buying yourself dinner, she said. With your own money? Apparently. This is ridiculous. They have no case. But it tells me they're probably more worried about money than they're letting on. That got me thinking. I asked my financial advisor to do some research on David's firm. What she found was interesting. David's law practice was struggling. Had been for months. The big promotion? It came with a title but no significant raise. The expensive lifestyle he and Miranda had been living? It was mostly financed by debt. They needed my money more than they had ever let on. But I didn't gloat about this discovery. Instead, it made me sad. My son was in trouble, real financial trouble, and instead of coming to me honestly and asking for help, he and his wife had been manipulating and using me. If they had just been honest. If they had just treated me with respect. If they had just asked instead of demanding. But they hadn't. And now it was too late. 3 months after the dinner, I made a decision that surprised even me. I sold my apartment in Queens and bought a small house in upstate New York. Nothing fancy, just a 2-bedroom cottage on a quiet street with a garden and a front porch. The kind of place Robert and I had always dreamed of retiring to. I didn't tell David I was moving until after the papers were signed. "Mom, you can't just disappear," he said when he finally reached me on the phone. "I'm not disappearing. I'm living my life." "What about the grandchildren? What about family? What about them? You've made it clear that I'm only welcome in your family when I'm useful to you." "Well, I'm choosing not to be useful anymore." "That's not, we never meant." "Yes, you did. You meant exactly that." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "We're both sorry. We handled things badly." "Yes, you did. Can we start over?" I considered this. Part of me wanted to forgive him, to go back to the way things were. But the way things were had been killing me slowly. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe someday. But right now, I need to focus on myself for a while." "How long?" "I don't know that either." After I hung up, I sat on my new front porch with a cup of tea and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. For the first time since Robert died, I felt at peace. My new neighbors were friendly but not intrusive. The woman next door, Helen, was a retired teacher who invited me to join her book club. The couple across the street had me over for barbecues and never once asked me for money or favors. I started taking art classes at the community center. Painting, something I had always wanted to try but never had time for. My first attempts were terrible, but I didn't care. They were mine. I joined a hiking group for seniors. Every Saturday, we would explore different trails in the Hudson Valley, stopping for lunch at small cafes and antique shops. I bought hiking boots and learned to identify different types of birds. I volunteered at the local animal shelter, walking dogs and socializing cats that had been abandoned or abused. There was something therapeutic about helping creatures who had also been discarded by the people who were supposed to love them. Slowly, I built a new life. A life that belonged to me. David called every few weeks. The conversations were awkward at first, stilted and formal. But gradually, they began to improve. We talked about safer subjects, the weather, books I was reading, his work. He never asked for money. I never offered. Miranda called less frequently, and when she did, the conversations were brief and polite. She was clearly uncomfortable with the new dynamic, unsure how to relate to me now that I wasn't fulfilling my old role. The grandchildren called occasionally. Tommy, now 8, would tell me about school and his friends. Sarah, 6, would share elaborate stories about her toys and games. These conversations were precious to me, but I was careful not to let them become emotional manipulation. 6 months after I moved, David drove up to visit me. It was the first time I had seen him since the restaurant. He looked older, tired. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Nice place," he said, looking around my small living room with its cheerful yellow walls and comfortable furniture. "I like it," I replied. "It's peaceful." We had dinner together, nothing fancy, just grilled chicken and vegetables from my garden. We talked about safe subjects, but there was an underlying tension that neither of us acknowledged. As he was getting ready to leave, he stopped at the door. "Mom," he said quietly, "I want you to know that I've been thinking about what you said. About how we treated you." I waited. "You were right. We did use you. And I'm ashamed of that. Thank you for saying that. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to make things right between us." I studied his face, this man who was still my little boy in so many ways despite being nearly 40 years old. "You could start by treating me like your mother instead of your employee," I said gently. "You could include me in family decisions instead of making them for me. You could ask instead of demanding." He nodded slowly. "I can do that. We'll see." After he left, I sat on my porch again and thought about forgiveness. About whether it was possible to rebuild a relationship that had been so badly damaged. I wasn't sure. But for the first time, I was willing to consider the possibility. That fall, I received an invitation that surprised me. David and Miranda were hosting Thanksgiving dinner, and they were inviting me to join them. Not to cook. Not to clean. Not to babysit. Just to be their guest. I almost said no. The old patterns would be too easy to fall back into. But something in the wording of the invitation gave me hope. "We would be honored to have you join us," it read. "No obligations, no expectations. Just family." I decided to take the risk. The dinner was awkward at first. Miranda was clearly trying to be on her best behavior, but it felt forced. David kept asking if I needed anything, if I was comfortable, if the food was okay. But Tommy and Sarah were genuinely happy to see me. They showed me their artwork from school, told me about their friends, asked about my house and my painting classes. For the first time in years, I felt like their grandmother instead of a stranger they were polite to. After dinner, while Miranda was loading the dishwasher, David sat next to me on the couch. "How are you doing, Mom?" "Really?" "I'm good," I said, and meant it. "I'm happier than I've been in a long time." "I'm glad. You deserve to be happy." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching Tommy and Sarah play with their toys. "I've been going to therapy," he said suddenly. I looked at him in surprise. "About our relationship. About how I treated you. About why I thought it was okay to use you the way I did. And what have you learned?" He was quiet for a long moment. "That I was so focused on providing for my family financially that I forgot about providing for them emotionally. And that I took your love for granted because I knew you would always be there no matter how badly I treated you." Past tense? I hope so. I'm trying to change. We both are. It wasn't a magic moment. There were no tearful reconciliations or dramatic declarations of love. But it was a start. Over the next year, our relationship slowly began to heal. David called more often, not because he needed something, but just to talk. He asked my opinion about decisions involving the children. He included me in family plans. Miranda remained more distant, but she was polite and respectful. She stopped making passive-aggressive comments about my clothes or my apartment or my way of speaking. Most importantly, they stopped asking for money. When David's law practice finally turned the corner and started making real profits, he even offered to pay back some of what I had loaned them over the years. I told him to put it in college funds for the children instead. The truth was, I didn't need the money back. What I had needed was respect, and finally, I was getting it. 2 years after that dinner at the Manhattan restaurant, I was sitting in my garden, painting a landscape of the mountains in the distance. The phone rang, and I considered ignoring it. I was at a tricky part of the painting where the light was hitting the trees just right. But something made me answer. "Grandma?" It was Tommy's voice, excited and breathless. "Guess what? I got the lead in the school play." "That's wonderful, honey. What play?" "It's called The Lion King. I'm going to be Simba." We talked for 20 minutes about the play, his lines, the costume his mother was helping him make. He was so excited that his enthusiasm was infectious. After we hung up, I realized that this was the first time in years that one of my grandchildren had called me with good news just because they wanted to share it with me. Not because their parents told them to. Not because they wanted something. Just because they were happy and wanted their grandmother to know about it. That night, I looked through the photo albums I had packed away so long ago. The pictures were still there, David as a baby, family vacations, birthday parties, graduations. But now they didn't make me sad. They reminded me of the love that had always been there, underneath all the pain and disappointment and manipulation. Love is complicated. Families are complicated. Sometimes the people we love the most are the ones who hurt us the deepest, not because they're evil, but because they're human. David had hurt me badly. He had used me and taken me for granted and treated me like a convenience rather than a person. But he was still my son, and underneath all of that, he did love me. It had just taken a $1,200 dinner and 2 years of separation for him to remember how to show it. These days, I live quietly in my little house upstate. I paint terrible landscapes and hike mountain trails and volunteer at the animal shelter. I have coffee with Helen from next door and dinner with the book club once a month. David visits regularly now, sometimes bringing the children, sometimes coming alone. We talk about his work, my hobbies, the children's school activities. Normal family conversations. Miranda is polite and sometimes even warm. She asks about my painting and remembers my birthday. It's not the relationship I once hoped for, but it's respectful, and that's enough. The children call me on their own now, sharing stories about their friends and school and the books they're reading. Tommy is 12 now and interested in photography. Sarah is 10 and wants to be a veterinarian. They know I'm their grandmother, not just some old woman who shows up at family functions. And that $1,200 dinner? It was worth every penny. Not because the food was good, though it was. Not because I proved a point, though I did. It was worth it because it taught me something I had forgotten, that I have value beyond what I can provide for other people. That I deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. That it's never too late to stand up for yourself. That sometimes the people who love you need to be reminded how to treat you properly. And that a woman who raised a successful lawyer and managed a household for 40 years is perfectly capable of managing her own life. Thank you very much. I still have that blue dress, the one I wore to the restaurant that night. Sometimes I put it on when I need to remember how powerful I felt in that moment when I ordered the most expensive item on the menu and watched my family's faces change. It hangs in my closet next to Robert's old jacket, which still smells faintly of his cologne. Two reminders of different kinds of strength, his quiet, steady love, and my newfound ability to demand the respect I deserve. Some nights, when I'm sitting on my porch watching the sunset, I think about other women my age who might be in the situation I was in. Women who are being used and taken for granted by their families. Women who have forgotten their own worth in the process of loving everyone else. If you're one of those women, let me tell you something, you are not a burden. You are not just a source of money or free labor or emotional support. You are a person with feelings and needs and the right to be treated with dignity. You raised these people. You sacrificed for them. You loved them unconditionally. But love should not be one-sided. Family should lift you up, not wear you down. It's never too late to change the dynamic. It's never too late to demand better treatment. It's never too late to walk away if they refuse to treat you properly. Yes, it's scary. Yes, you might end up alone for a while. But being alone with your dignity is better than being surrounded by people who don't value you. And you might be surprised by what happens when you finally stand up for yourself. You might discover that you're stronger than you thought. You might find new relationships that are based on mutual respect rather than one-sided giving. You might even find that the family members who were taking you for granted start to treat you better once they realize you won't tolerate being treated badly anymore. Or you might not. They might choose their pride over their relationship with you. And if that happens, then you'll know where you really stood with them all along. But either way, you'll know that you stood up for yourself. That you chose self-respect over the illusion of family harmony. And that's worth more than all the family dinners in the world. So let me ask you something, have you ever found yourself in a situation like mine? Have you ever been taken for granted by the people you love most? Tell me about it in the comments below. And if this story touched you in any way, if it reminded you of your own strength or gave you courage to demand better treatment, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Because sometimes we all need to be reminded that we're worth more than tap water at a fancy restaurant. We're worth the $1,200 Wagyu beef. We're worth respect, kindness, and genuine love. And we're never too old to start demanding it. But let me tell you about something else that happened in the months that followed, something that showed me just how deep the transformation in my family really went. It was about 8 months after my move to upstate New York when I received a phone call that changed everything. Not from David or Miranda, but from someone I hadn't expected to hear from. Mrs. Rodriguez? The voice on the other end was young, professional. This is Jennifer Walsh from Manhattan Elementary. I'm the principal here. My heart skipped a beat. Tommy and Sarah went to Manhattan Elementary. Had something happened to one of them? Is everything all right with my grandchildren? I asked quickly. Oh, everything's fine with Tommy and Sarah, she assured me. I'm actually calling about something else entirely. We're planning our annual Grandparents' Appreciation Assembly, and both children have been asking if their grandmother would be able to attend. I was quiet for a moment, processing this. In all the years Tommy and Sarah had been in school, I had never been invited to a single school event. Parent-teacher conferences, school plays, sports days, I had heard about them all secondhand, if at all. They asked for me specifically? I managed. Oh yes, Mrs. Walsh said warmly. Tommy wrote in his essay about family that his grandmother is an artist who lives in the mountains and knows all about birds and hiking. Sarah drew a picture of the three of you together for her People I Love project. They've been talking about you quite a bit lately. After I hung up the phone, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at the calendar on my wall. The assembly was 3 weeks away. I could drive down to the city, attend the event, and drive back the same day. But what struck me most was that Tommy and Sarah had asked for me. Not because their parents told them to, but because they wanted me there. I called David that evening to ask about the assembly. Oh, he said, and I could hear surprise in his voice. Mrs. Walsh called you directly? Yes. She said the children requested that I be invited. There was a pause. Mom, if you're comfortable coming down for it, Miranda and I would love to have you there. We could all go together. The old me would have been thrilled just to be included. The new me was more cautious. I'll come for Tommy and Sarah, I said carefully. But I'll drive myself and sit with the other grandparents. This is about them, not about us fixing our relationship. Of course, David said quickly. Whatever makes you comfortable. The day of the assembly, I drove down from upstate New York wearing my best dress, not the blue one from the restaurant, but a soft green one that made me feel confident without being confrontational. I arrived at the school early and sat in the auditorium watching other grandparents filter in. They looked like me, silver-haired, proud, clutching programs and tissues for the inevitable tears. I realized I had never been part of this community before, never been just another grandmother in a crowd of grandparents there to celebrate their families. When Tommy saw me in the audience, his face lit up like Christmas morning. He waved so enthusiastically that several other children turned to see who had captured his attention. Sarah spotted me a moment later and practically bounced out of her chair with excitement. The assembly was beautiful. Children shared poems and songs about their grandparents. They displayed artwork and essays about family traditions and wisdom passed down through generations. When it was Tommy's turn to speak, he walked to the microphone with the confidence of someone much older than 10. "My grandmother is the strongest person I know," he began, looking directly at me. "She taught me that it's never too late to start over and that standing up for yourself doesn't make you mean, it makes you brave." I felt tears spring to my eyes. When had he learned these lessons? When had I taught them to him? Sarah's presentation came next, a poster board covered with photos and drawings. There were pictures of me that I didn't even know had been taken. Me in my garden, me with paint-stained fingers holding up a canvas, me laughing with Helen on my front porch. "This is my grandma," Sarah announced proudly. "She used to be sad, but now she's happy. She lives in a house with a garden and she paints pictures of trees. She taught me that family should make you feel good about yourself." After the assembly, other grandparents approached me in the hallway. "Your grandchildren are so articulate," one woman said. "They clearly adore you." "That boy of yours spoke with such maturity," said another. "You should be very proud." I was proud. But more than that, I was amazed. Somehow, in the midst of all the family drama and hurt feelings and difficult conversations, my grandchildren had been watching and learning. They had absorbed lessons about self-respect and boundaries and the importance of being treated well. David and Miranda approached me as I was getting ready to leave. "Thank you for coming," David said. "It meant the world to them to have you here." "And to us," Miranda added quietly. It was the first time in years that she had spoken to me without any underlying tension or false cheerfulness. "They're good kids," I replied. "You're raising them well." It was a small moment, but it felt significant. For the first time since I'd known her, Miranda smiled at me with what seemed like genuine warmth. On the drive home, I thought about what had changed. The children were different, more confident, more articulate about their feelings. They had learned to express affection genuinely rather than performing it for their parents. They had learned that relationships should be mutual, that love should feel good for everyone involved. But it wasn't just the children who had changed. David was different too. More thoughtful in his conversations with me, more likely to ask follow-up questions and remember details from previous calls. He had started sending me articles he thought I'd find interesting and photos from family outings without me having to ask. Even Miranda was evolving. Her communications with me, while still somewhat formal, had lost their edge of condescension. She had started asking for my opinion on the children's activities and actually seemed to listen to my responses. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had been gradual, built on small interactions and careful boundary setting. But it was real. A few weeks after the school assembly, I received another unexpected phone call. This time it was from my financial advisor, Janet. "I've been thinking about our conversation a few months ago," she said. "About David's financial situation and your concerns about the family dynamics. I have a proposition for you." Janet explained that she had been working with other clients in similar situations, older adults whose children were struggling financially but who had damaged their relationships through manipulation and poor treatment. "What if we set up a different kind of family support system?" she suggested. "Instead of giving loans or gifts that create dependency and resentment, we create opportunities for your family to earn support through genuine relationship building." The idea intrigued me. Janet outlined a plan where David's family could earn money through specific actions that demonstrated respect and inclusion, visiting me regularly, including me in family decisions, spending quality time together without asking for financial help first. "It's not manipulation," she explained. "It's creating incentives for the behavior you want to see while protecting yourself from being taken advantage of." I thought about this for several days. Part of me worried that it would feel transactional, that it would turn family relationships into business arrangements. But another part of me recognized that what we had before hadn't been a real relationship at all, it had been me giving and them taking, with no balance or mutual respect. I decided to try a modified version of Janet's suggestion. The next time David called, I had a proposal for him. "I've been thinking about the future," I told him. "About what kind of grandmother I want to be and what kind of family relationships I want to have." I explained that I was planning to update my will and estate planning, and that I wanted to ensure my legacy reflected my values, particularly the importance of treating family members with respect and maintaining genuine connections. "I'm not trying to control anyone," I said carefully. "But I want to make sure that the people who inherit from me are people who have invested in a real relationship with me. Not just people who see me as a source of money." David was quiet for a long moment. What does that mean, practically speaking? It means that my will is going to reflect the actual relationships I have with people, not just genetic connections. If someone wants to be remembered in my estate, they need to make sure they're creating memories and connections worth remembering. I let him absorb this information. I'm not asking for grand gestures, I continued. I'm asking for genuine relationship. Regular communication that isn't about money. Inclusion in family decisions. Respect for my opinions and my independence. The kind of treatment that any person deserves from their family. After we hung up, I wondered if I had gone too far. Was I being manipulative now? Was I using money to force behavior just like they had used me? But as the days passed, I realized that what I was doing was different. I wasn't trying to control their behavior for my own benefit. I was setting standards for how I deserved to be treated and making it clear that there would be consequences for treating me poorly. The response was almost immediate. David started calling more frequently, and the calls weren't about money or favors. He told me about his cases at work, asked for my advice about parenting decisions, shared funny stories about things the children had said. Miranda began including me in planning for family events. She called to ask my opinion about birthday party themes and vacation destinations. She even asked for my recipe for the chocolate chip cookies I used to make when David was young. Most significantly, they started inviting me to things without expecting me to provide any service. Family dinners where I was asked to come as a guest, not as the cook or the babysitter. Outings where my presence was desired for its own sake, not because they needed someone to watch the children. Tommy and Sarah started calling me regularly on their own, without prompting from their parents. Our conversations ranged from school gossip to questions about my artwork to philosophical discussions about fairness and kindness that were surprisingly sophisticated for such young children. 6 months after our conversation about my estate planning, David drove up to visit me on a Saturday afternoon. Not for a special occasion, not because he needed anything, but just because he wanted to spend time with me. We sat on my front porch drinking lemonade and watching the birds at my feeders. The conversation flowed easily from topic to topic: his work, my painting classes, the children's activities, memories of his father. At one point, he looked at me with an expression I remembered from when he was a child and had something important to say. "Mom, I need to tell you something." I braced myself, wondering if we were about to slide back into old patterns. "I've been thinking about what you said about your will and estate planning. And I realized that it forced me to examine what kind of son I've been to you." He paused, clearly struggling with the words. I was ashamed when I really thought about it. About how I treated you, especially after Dad died. I took advantage of your kindness and your love, and I let Miranda's attitude toward you influence how I behaved. David, please, let me finish. I need to say this. He turned to face me fully. I don't want you to remember me in your will because I've earned it through good behavior in the last few months. I want you to remember me because I've become the kind of son who deserves to be remembered. The kind of son Dad would have wanted me to be. We sat in silence for a few minutes, both of us emotional. You raised me to be better than the person I became after Dad died, he continued. And I want to get back to being that person. Not because of money or inheritance, but because I miss having a real relationship with my mother. That conversation marked another turning point in our relationship. The change felt deeper this time, more fundamental. David wasn't just modifying his behavior, he was examining his values and his priorities. Over the following months, he started making changes that went beyond his relationship with me. He began setting better boundaries with Miranda about her treatment of people she considered beneath her social status. He signed up for marriage counseling to address the patterns that had developed in their relationship. He even started volunteering at a legal aid clinic, using his skills to help people who couldn't afford expensive lawyers. The ripple effects extended to the whole family. Miranda, perhaps influenced by David's changes or perhaps genuinely growing as a person, began treating service workers with more respect. She started saying please and thank you to waiters and store clerks. She stopped making dismissive comments about people's appearance or background. The children, always sensitive to the emotional climate around them, became more confident and expressive. They started speaking up for themselves when they disagreed with their parents' decisions. They showed more empathy toward their classmates and more independence in their thinking. One evening, almost a year after the restaurant incident, I was painting in my studio when the phone rang. It was Sarah, and she was crying. "Grandma, can you help me with something?" My heart immediately went into protective mode. "Of course, sweetheart. What's wrong?" "There's a girl at school named Lucia, and some of the other kids are being mean to her because her mom doesn't speak English very well and she wears different clothes than us." I waited, letting her continue. "I want to be her friend, but some of my friends say I shouldn't because she's not like us. But Mom said you taught her that families should make people feel good about themselves, and I think friends should too." But I don't know what to do because I don't want my other friends to be mad at me. I smiled, feeling a surge of pride and love for this thoughtful little girl. What do you think is the right thing to do? I asked gently. I think I should be nice to Lucia. But it's scary. Being brave often is scary, I told her. But you know what I've learned? The people who really care about you will respect you for standing up for someone who needs a friend. And if they don't, then maybe they weren't such good friends to begin with. We talked for another 20 minutes about kindness and courage and how sometimes doing the right thing means risking disapproval from others. By the end of the conversation, Sarah had decided to invite Lucia to sit with her at lunch the next day. A week later, she called me with an update. Not only had Lucia become a good friend, but Sarah's act of inclusion had inspired other children to be more welcoming as well. The situation had resolved in the best possible way. But what struck me most was that Sarah had called me for guidance. Not her parents, not her teacher, but her grandmother. She had seen me as someone who understood difficult social situations and could offer wisdom about navigating them. That phone call made me realize that the changes in our family relationships had created space for me to fulfill a role I had always wanted but never been allowed to have, that of a wise elder who could offer guidance and support to the younger generation. The restoration of my family relationships didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't without setbacks. There were still moments of tension, still conversations that didn't go well, still times when old patterns threatened to resurface. But the fundamental dynamic had shifted. I was no longer a resource to be managed or a problem to be solved. I was a person with feelings and opinions and wisdom to offer. I was a grandmother who could provide emotional support and life guidance. I was a mother who deserved respect and inclusion. Most importantly, I had learned that love without respect isn't really love at all. And that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept treatment that diminishes your dignity. The $1,200 dinner had been about more than making a point or teaching a lesson. It had been about reclaiming my sense of self-worth and demanding the treatment I deserved. But the real victory wasn't in that single moment of defiance. The real victory was in the slow, careful work of rebuilding relationships based on mutual respect and genuine affection. Today, when I look at my family, I see people who have grown and changed and learned to value each other more deeply. I see grandchildren who know they are loved not just because they're family, but because they're genuinely delightful people worth knowing. I see a son who has remembered how to be kind and respectful to the woman who raised him. I see a daughter-in-law who has learned that treating people with dignity isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. And I see myself, not as a victim or a martyr or a source of money and services, but as a person worthy of love and respect. The blue dress still hangs in my closet, but I don't need to put it on to remember my strength anymore. I carry that strength with me every day, in every interaction, in every decision to demand the treatment I deserve. That's the lesson I want to leave with you. You are worthy of respect. You are worthy of genuine love. You are worthy of being treated as a whole person with feelings and needs and opinions that matter. And if the people in your life aren't treating you that way, then maybe it's time for your own $1,200 dinner moment. Maybe it's time to stand up, speak up, and demand better. Because you're worth so much more than tap water. You're worth the whole feast.